to surrender their weapons. His instruction was to dispatch 6 troops to advance ahead and keep an eye out for the enemy's movements. But their adversaries cannot be seen on the ground because they are firing from the roof of the building instead. Despite their best efforts, the adversary was able to shoot at the 6 valiant men, who were unable to seek shelter among themselves. The remainder of Captain Gu then arrived and cried out for a halt to the fighting. They were successful in rescuing the injured troops. However, the adversary was just waiting for the ideal opportunity to bomb Captain Gu's crew, resulting in even more losses. They made one more move, bringing in their cannons to bomb the enemy closer to them, costing a large number of lives. Captain Gu had recently lost his political officer, and the majority of his unit had surrendered to the authorities. Because of the murder of his political commissar, Gu is enraged and seeks to kill the NRA troops who have surrendered their weapons. The upshot is that his commander, Colonel Liu Zeshui, places him in prison for 3 days owing to his disgraceful actions on behalf of his regiment and for misconduct. In jail, Wang Jingqian, an enlisted soldier and former school teacher who has been imprisoned for cowardice, becomes a buddy of his while incarcerated. Wang gave Captain Gu food since he was aware that the captain had not had a satisfactory supper as a result of the battle. On the other hand, Captain Gu preferred to have a nice rest rather than eat anything. After being freed, Gu requested that his superior seek a new political officer for his battalion, and he had the idea of hiring his cellmate, Wang, as a political officer. Captain Gu and his 46 remaining troops are sent to defend a coal mine on the bank of the Wen River, near Tai'an, Shandong, which is under attack by the Chinese army. They are not allowed to leave until they hear a bugle call for the formation to begin. According to Liu's approval, Wang is promoted to political commissar of the 9th Company. Wang is the most educated guy in the company and hence the most qualified. The 9th Company comes under intense assault by NRA troops almost soon after securing their location and introducing Wan to the rest of the company. Fewer than a handful of PLA troops remain alive after successfully repelling an onslaught of enemy infantry and supporting armor, and destroying 2 enemy tanks. They have taken refuge in their barracks and are waiting for the bugle call, as Captain Gu has instructed. When the NRAs attacked, everyone instantly retreated to their positions to prepare for another assault by them. Before heading out into the field for the operation, Captain Gu spoke with Wang, who was just appointed as his new political officer. During this time, their enemies are closing in on their position, and Captain Gu's military units are preparing their weapons and positioning themselves in preparation. Because of an explosion, Gu is temporarily deaf and orders them to fight until they are victorious. They do so until they are killed or captured. In his first week with the 9th Company, the new political officer has witnessed firsthand how their team is being brutally murdered by the enemy. Another member, Blackie, was also struck in the neck by a bullet. Captain Gu administered first aid immediately and requested that the political officer take over the medics so that the team could continue fighting as a unit. Captain Gu called for a ceasefire and was able to save the lives of the majority of the soldiers. They need to conserve their ammunition for the next attack. In total, 11 people have died and the most are in critical condition. The dead bodies were taken to the mine at his command. Blackie died a short time later, and he grabbed some of the belongings of the fallen troops and kept them for himself. Even Wang was allowed to take a break as they cared for the wounded in the mine. He's taking a moment to reflect on what he's just gotten himself into. 2 soldiers crept down from the deceased soldiers while the rest of the men rested. A watch that Sergeant Zhang took from a fallen soldier is what ultimately cost them their sniper, Sergeant Zhang. He was shot by an NRA sniper. A watch was all it took for the squad to lose a vital player. Zhang had intended to give the watch to Captain Gu as a gift, but it turned out that he had given his life in exchange for the timepiece instead. A tank shell is approaching, and Captain Gu orders that the explosives be prepared and thrown at the advancing enemies as soon as possible. The PLA will not stop firing until all of the tanks have been destroyed. Captain Gu, the last surviving member of the 9th Company, is struck unconscious by a tank shell fired by the NRA during the conflict. Captain Gu can't hear the political officer's cries for help. The only thing he cares about is completing the mission and killing all of the enemy. The NRA's tank shell is turned down by Captain Gu in retaliation for him striking the NRA's tank shell. Captain Gu's soldiers were gone in a matter of minutes. Armed men managed to free the trapped victims. The death toll has risen to 32. Captain Gu is begged to leave the area by their wounded buddy. Captain Gu, on the other hand, was not on board with the idea of making everyone mad at him. The only way out of this situation is by death. Captain Gu is the only survivor left after the other survivors fight to the death. Later, PLA forces are able to retake the region and discover Captain Gu, who who is unconscious and severely wounded and is dressed in an NRA uniform that he stole while being trapped behind enemy lines. At a military hospital 2 months after, Captain Gu tries to explain that he was a captain in the People's Liberation Army and that, after being knocked unconscious, he awakens, puts on the enemy's uniform in order to steal food from a nearby warehouse, and then bombed an enemy fuel depot before falling unconscious again before being revived. As a result, since the PLA underwent a reorganization while Captain Gu was unconscious and because the 139th Regiment, whose soldiers were virtually all killed, is no longer remembered, Captain Gu is unable to guarantee the verification of his identity. He is despised by the other patients in the hospital, who consider him a deserter who has abandoned his post. When China became involved in the Korean War a few months later, Captain Gu volunteered to fight as an enlisted soldier on the Korean front line after he recovered. Captain Gu sacrifices his life during an artillery spotting operation in which the squad pretended to be soldiers from the Republic of Korea Army's 6th Infantry Division, in order to rescue Lieutenant Zhao Erdu, the unit commander, who had unintentionally stepped on an anti-personnel landmine and an American tank shell was already on its way to their location to ask for a location. However, because they are posing as Koreans and do not know how to speak the Korean language, they divert the American's attention away from the landmine and order him to step aside immediately. Meanwhile, Zhao continues to carry out his assigned mission while Captain Gu, who is still holding down the landmine, manages to escape but loses his right eye as a result of the explosion that follows. As the sole survivor of his company, Captain Gu might as well die with his team's honor by offering to sacrifice himself on the field of battle for them. He had vivid memories of the battle that his team had endured, as well as the manner in which they died on that particular day. They end up becoming good friends as a result of their experiences. Later on, Zhao lends his support to Captain Gu's efforts to have himself and the services of his old 9th Company recognized by the government, an effort that Zhao believes is a good idea. Captain Gu even assisted a fellow officer in identifying the weapons that they had recovered. Captain Gu returns to the Wen River battlefield and attempts to locate the mine where the battle took place, but he is unsuccessful in his efforts. He feels betrayed by the fact that the mine has been reopened and is now in operation, as well as the fact that the previous entrance has been hidden behind mounds of coal. He also comes into contact with Wang's widow and is successful in convincing her to marry Zhao. Zhao eventually succeeds in discovering the site of Colonel Liu Zeshui's grave, the leader of the 139th Regiment, as time progresses. Captain Gu makes his way to the tomb, where he discovers that the curator is Liu's aide and bodyguard, who managed to escape the battle despite losing one of his arms. In fact, the 9th Company was purposefully sacrificed in order to gain time for the remainder of the regiment before engaging the NRA troops, according to the museum's curator, who confirmed that the bugle call was never heard. Captain Gu erupts into a frenzy and engages in combat with the curator but eventually manages to calm himself. Captain Gu sets up camp at the mine and tries to dig out the remains of his men with a shovel, ignoring the objections of the miners on the surface. Eventually, after a month of research, a live official from Captain Gu's parent unit is discovered and the acts of the 139th Regiment, notably the 9th Company, are corroborated and authenticated. The PLA sends a formal note to the local authorities in order to recognize the 9th Company's contributions. On the other hand, Captain Gu is still distraught since he has not been able to locate the additional dead. During this time, he is taken back to a previous location when he and Wang buried the remains of the others deep into the mine as enemy troops closed in on them. Captain Gu paid respect to the tombs of his regiment and talked to the caretaker. While Captain Gu moved outside to continue fighting, a gravely wounded Wang detonated a bomb at the door to the building to prevent the enemy from seizing the dead, so dying himself. Captain Gu is enraged upon hearing this as he didn't know that everyone died in that battle. Many years later, the remains of the other soldiers are discovered during an excavation for an irrigation project in the same location. The PLA erects a memorial at the spot and holds a military burial for the deceased soldiers of the 9th Company, with full military honors accorded to them.